Well, coming up today on this video, we're going to talk about some of the big misunderstandings of the American Civil War. Fred will help kind of clear up some things that maybe you are unsure about, or you've heard one thing, but maybe that's not the complete truth. We'll talk about state rights, the Confederacy as a whole. Was it united? And Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. We'll talk about all those things today coming up. Glad to have you on the Threads from the National Tapestry YouTube channel. I am Ben George with Fred Kiger, the wonderful narrator of all of our stories here on the channel. Fred, we're talking about misunderstandings today. And again, as we go through this today, please hit like on the video, subscribe if you haven't already. But some common misunderstandings, and I'm sure if you could go like much like our What If video that we recently recorded as well, there's probably a long list of misunderstandings, right? But we've narrowed it down to 3 today. So let me jump into them, Fred. I'm going to start off with states' rights. So there's always this conversation and a debate about what led to the Southern secession. And states' rights obviously is a big part of that conversation, that discussion. So help clear us up when it as it is concerned to states' rights being that key cause for secession.
Been a major element of the lost cause, which gave rise some 10, 15 years after the American Civil War, specifically stated that states' rights was the main cause for the South secession. Of course, that has been a mainstay for particularly many Southern folks who have professed and embraced that states' right was the main cause. But when you investigate what those states' rights were trying to protect, you eventually come full circle back to the institution of slavery, allowing its spread, keeping legislation from tearing down the Southern world as it was antebellum South, in the sense of slavery being so very much a part of the economic, political, and cultural part of the states which formed the Confederacy. So, yes, the main cause of the American Civil War was slavery. It was slavery. It ripped the nation apart. It was absolutely an explosive issue. And even if one takes a look at the ordinances of secession of the 11 states that eventually seceded from the United States, many of those ordinances of secession, which were voted upon and had to receive a majority vote in order for the state to leave the Union, expressly stated or indirectly made great reference to the fact that they were defending their Southern world or defending slavery that was very much a part of their universe, of their world, of their economy, of their political and social structure. So, states' rights, proponents of the lost cause, something that has been maintained and is very much still an issue in the sense of federal versus states' rights. But when you boil it down to and you find out what those states' rights, what those measures, what those Southern states wanted to be able to control, to keep away from federal incursion legislatively, we're back to slavery. We're back to slavery being the main cause of the war. Now, that being said, perhaps the better question is, what caused secession? And then what caused people to go to war? Many folks in the American South were not slave owners. In fact, I've seen figures that reflect that perhaps 25% of the American South were slave owners. Some 75% were not. And those that were not holders of slave, many of them had particular frustration and anger to those who were the landed, the wealthy, those that seemed to control politics and the economy. There was not a whole lot of love shared between, for example, far western North Carolina and eastern North Carolina, where the landowners, slave landowners, and plantation owners lived. For that matter, northern Alabama, eastern Tennessee, 48 counties of Virginia that were mountainous and had few, if any, cash crops and few, if any, slaves, actually seceded from Virginia to form, in June of 1863, the ratified state and entered into the Union in that particular time frame, West Virginia. So, while slavery may have caused the war, it cannot be stated that every Southern soldier went to war to defend slavery. Many of them entered the war to defend home, to defend loved ones, to protect state, to resist a federal authority who's trying to tell them what they should think and what they should do. And while we're in it, for that matter, every Northern soldier did not necessarily go to war to end slavery. Those two factors, that there was, if you will, a united South or a united North, and I realize that we're now tiptoeing onto the next misunderstanding, there simply was not a united South, and there simply was not a united North. We look at the newspaper articles and the fact that Abraham Lincoln was vilified by many in the North for his war leadership, by his subjugation of the South, for his positions, particularly on slavery and trying to get his arms around ending it. And while we're in the South, as I mentioned earlier, when you had parts of Southern states who had mountainous areas in particular, as opposed to areas where slavery, cash crops, plantation owners could be successful, there was going to be a difference of opinion. And while, again, slavery may have been the main reason for why many of those people who did have the cash crops and were the magistrates and the legislators and the landowners were fighting to defend slavery, you had a tremendous segment of the Southern population who went to war to defend loved ones, to defend home, what have you, but were not going to war to defend the landowners whom many resented.
Yeah, I think there's always this kind of thought that both sides were kind of pushing in the same direction, right? They all had the same beliefs. They were all thought, hey, I stand strongly and firmly behind what our side is fighting for. That just wasn't the case, right? The idea that the Confederacy especially was united just wasn't true.
You know, I've always had a saying, Ben, that I've used many times in talks, that Southerners made lousy Confederates. If you think about it,
yeah.
Okay, they secede to be able to control more of their own destiny, but the war went against them so quickly that they had to resort in Richmond to tactics that became very similar to what they had seceded against originally. So, no, there was no united Confederacy. There was no monolithic solid South per se. And again, we simply have to look at geography. The mountainous regions of many of the Confederate states just did not have the makeup, did not have the cash crops, and did not have the political climate to defend an institution that, again, many of them resented. When we start talking about the eastern tidewater landowners of Virginia or eastern North Carolina, southern Alabama, other areas across the South. You know, there were certain areas in particular, Scott County, Tennessee, as well as eastern Tennessee, all of West Virginia, Winston County, Alabama, Jones County, Mississippi, Searcy County in Arkansas. And even in, those were areas where there was outright anti-Confederate organization and resistance. And there was an organization in North Carolina and Western Virginia called the Heroes of America. They were known also as the red strings, for the red string that might be in a windowsill or might be a part of someone's clothing that would identify you as a member of the heroes of America. Those folks were definitely anti-Confederate and resisted the draft, resisted many of the Confederate measures that they felt were trampling upon their rights. So, no unified North, as the draft riots in New York City in July of 1863 certainly illustrate, and no unified South. What's amazing that Mr. Lincoln could keep everything together to push the war to its conclusion, and that the Confederacy lasted as long as it did.
Yeah, very interesting to kind of sort through that and look at the true reality of the situation on both sides. It's, a lot of people disagreed with what was happening across the board. All right, as we get into our final misunderstanding we want to discuss in this video, please hit subscribe if you haven't already. Also, please consider becoming a Thread loyalist and supporting our storytelling. All right, last one, the Emancipation Proclamation that Abraham Lincoln presented. Obviously, that gets pointed at as the big turning point for slavery, right? And the idea and the misunderstanding is that all slaves were freed by that proclamation, but that's not quite true, correct?
That is absolutely incorrect. Unfortunately, because we enjoy fast food history, give it to me short, sweet, and quick. Many people believe that the Emancipation Proclamation was the death knell of the institution of slavery. No. It was introduced immediately after the Battle of Antietam or Sharpsburg, Maryland. It was introduced because Mr. Lincoln had been advised to hold that proclamation until there was a Union victory, and George McClellan proclaimed it as such. And so on September the 22nd, 1862, he proclaims it. The Emancipation Proclamation essentially said that on January the 1st, 1863, all slaves currently being held in states still under rebellion would be declared forever free. Let's think about that. How can Mr. Lincoln free all the slaves in areas still under rebellion, still under Confederate control? No, he could not. In fact, if you were a slave in areas that the Union military held or was under Union control, you were not freed. And if you were a slave in one of the border states of Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, Missouri, you also were not included in that proclamation for fear that those Southern sympathizers in those slave-holding states that remained loyal to the Union might push or petition to leave the Union or to reinforce their support militarily or economically for the Confederacy. But what Mr. Lincoln did astutely do is he changed the fabric of the course of the war. Mr. Lincoln personally hated slavery, thought it an abomination, but he couldn't push that through for many of the fears that we just talked about, the slaveholding border states and what have you. He did not want them to secede and go with the Confederacy. But what he did do is he did take that proclamation and give the American Civil War a crusade. He gave it a theme, if you will, that upon Union victory, he would push for a 13th Amendment that would end slavery everywhere in the United States of America, and that did indeed come in December of 1865. What he also did was he gave notice to the European powers that may have been still considering acknowledging or supplying the Confederacy. And what he did by giving the American Civil War a crusade to end slavery was that if England or France or whomever, if you acknowledge or recognize the Confederacy, you in essence will be acknowledging and recognizing the institution of slavery, which many of you got rid of some 30 years prior. So what he did was plant a seed of hope, a seed for future action, and to isolate the Confederacy from any diplomatic assistance for the rest of the war. A quite astute and a quite memorable proclamation that indeed served as the seed for what would become the 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States.
Well, great stuff as always, Freddie. We appreciate you breaking this down for us and clearing up some common misunderstandings as it relates to the American Civil War. We appreciate you watching this video. Please subscribe, like the video as well, tell a friend, and we always appreciate your support, especially those of the Threads loyalists who support us each and every month. Fred, as always, thanks for your time. We always enjoy hearing from you.
Ben, thank you so much for having me. And again, to all of you, thank you so very, very much for continuing to support and to be listeners to what we're trying to do here. We appreciate the fact that you allow us to come into your homes and to spin stories about a dramatic and powerful time in America's history.
Absolutely. Well said, Fred, as always. Thanks for your time. We'll talk to you again soon.
I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone for listening to Threads from the National Tapestry. You know, each of these episodes is the result of hours and hours of research and preparation, and it means a great deal to me and our production team to see the likes, comments, and views. Let me make clear that everything we do here will always be accessible to any who are curious to learn about the American Civil War. But we would like to ask you to consider to become a member, a Threads loyalist, if you will. For less than $5 each month, your support will help us to continue sharing our passion for that tumultuous yet important period of history. Joining is quite easy to do. At the top of each show description, you'll find a link, if you will, to join, whether you're watching, liking, commenting, or becoming a Threads loyalist. If you click on that link, your support for Threads from the National Tapestry will mean a great deal to me, to our team, and there's no question any contribution, your support, certainly makes a difference, and it's a wonderful acknowledgement for what we try to do. Thank you.